My fiancée wanted to throw a surprise and, without my knowledge, invited my cruel twin sister to our wedding. A few months ago, at 28, I got engaged to a 26-year-old girl I had been dating for 3 years, and we were supposed to get married. 2 days before the engagement, my girlfriend had been an ordinary, rather calm person, but as soon as she put on the ring, she turned into a controlling and stubborn personality who wouldn't listen to anything I said. She took over the entire organization of the wedding and disregarded my opinion. She did everything her own way. She invited just about anyone, including my guests, even very old friends with whom I hadn't spoken for many years. I asked her several times not to invite such people because it would be inappropriate, but she was convinced that everyone who had ever known me should be invited. In the end, I stopped trying to change anything and let her do whatever she wanted, hoping that this new side of her would disappear after the wedding. She had always had issues with control, even before we met. A friend who introduced us told me about it, but I never imagined things would get so bad. She always had to be in charge of every situation, and everything had to happen exactly as she said, otherwise, she would literally lose her mind. I tolerated her behavior for several weeks before the wedding because I loved her, but then, well, then she did something absolutely unforgivable. When we were drawing up the guest list a few months ago, my fiancée asked me about my sister. I was a little shocked because I had clearly told her at the beginning of our relationship that 10 years ago, I had cut off all communication with my sister and hadn't heard from her since, and that was exactly how I wanted it to remain. She had met my family about 6 months into our relationship, and when she saw several family photos on the walls, she naturally asked, "Who is that little girl who looks just like me in all my childhood photos?" I had to tell her about my twin sister. We are 28, and my sister and I stopped communicating 10 years ago because of one incident that changed my life for the worse. My sister and I weren't friends in childhood, even though in the photos it might have seemed that we were two happy children constantly hugging and smiling. But that was just for show. In reality, we were constantly in conflict. There was a kind of friendly competition between my brother and me, or so you might think, but we didn't love each other. We outright hated one another, and did everything we could to outdo each other. This continued until we went to high school, and I ended up with higher exam scores. She was furious about that, and couldn't even look at me for several days, which suited me perfectly because I felt that I had finally triumphed over her. But I couldn't even imagine that the worst was yet to come. A few weeks later came the time to find out which colleges accepted us. We were both top students, so we expected to be admitted to every college we applied to. My first choice was Yale, and hers was Princeton. I hadn't even considered applying to Princeton because I thought that if she were there, I wouldn't want to be in the same place with her. But my friends convinced me to apply at the last moment, since one couldn't decide one's future based on such a trivial matter as the possible presence of one's sister in the same school. It was time to put an end to that stupid rivalry, so I eventually submitted my application. I made a real show of not applying to Princeton, and even mocked my sister during dinner for it. Then, when I changed my mind and did submit an application, I decided to keep it a secret. It would have been too embarrassing to change my stance after all my dramatic declarations. To make matters even worse, my sister also claimed that she hadn't applied to Yale for a similar reason, probably just to get back at me, but I don't think she broke her word. In the end, I was accepted by both universities, and my sister was accepted by Columbia, but not Princeton, which was a serious blow to her since she had been talking about Princeton since the last year of high school. I immediately realized that things would only get worse when she found out that I had been accepted there, and I was right. I planned to keep my Princeton acceptance a secret because I wasn't going there anyway, and it wasn't necessary for my sister to know. I wasn't afraid of hurting her feelings. I just didn't want extra drama before leaving for college. But it seems my parents somehow found out about it. they'd probably looked at my mail. In any case, my mother decided to throw a surprise party for both of us on the same day, with the names of the colleges written on our cakes. I knew nothing about it. Had I known, I might have done something to prevent it. As soon as my sister saw the word Princeton on my cake, she snorted and declared that I hadn't even applied. But it seemed she understood everything by the look on my face. She started yelling in my face that I had ruined her life and stolen her future. I tried to explain that I didn't know she wouldn't be accepted and that I never intended to do that. And of course, given our history of rivalry, it was hard to believe. Even though I truly felt sorry, after a while, once she finally calmed down, she ran out of the house in tears. I stayed in the living room while our parents told me how tired they were of our constant quarrels and that we both needed to grow up. I couldn't blame them because they did everything they could to improve our relationship, but it seems that from birth we simply hated each other. In the end, they gave up and let us live our own lives. When we went to high school, I decided to follow our parents' advice to at least maintain a neutral relationship with my sister. So, about 15 minutes after she left, I went after her to talk. Most of the guests had already left after her hysterics, and it was already dark outside. I didn't see her, and I began calling her name. But before I could understand anything, I felt a strong blow to the back of my head and collapsed. After that, I only remember experiencing terrible pain and screaming for help until I lost consciousness. When I came to, I was already in a hospital room, and my arm was injured. They said that my unhinged sister had been waiting for me outside. As soon as I called her, she struck me on the head with a damn shovel and then, to complete the act, stomped on my left wrist with all her might, causing a dislocation. I could hardly believe what they said. Yes, my sister and I had many disagreements, but I never imagined that she would do something so cruel, not only to me, but to anyone. My parents begged me not to file a police report against my own sister, and I decided to leave things as they were. After that, I never saw her again, and didn't even ask our parents about her. I didn't know which college she went to or where she went after the incident. Our parents sent her somewhere, but I didn't ask where, because I knew they still kept in touch with her on weekends. They wouldn't say with whom she was staying, but I wasn't a fool. I understood that I no longer held any grudge against her, because it was the best way to keep us apart, given that we clearly brought out the worst in each other. After I recovered and was discharged, I went to university, but I missed several weeks and fell far behind. My grades that semester were far from satisfactory. In addition, I frequently suffered from migraines due to the head injury, and the bump on the back of my head constantly reminded me of what my own sister did to me in a fit of rage. Needless to say, that year was emotionally very hard for me, and I had to undergo therapy to feel like myself again. 10 years have passed since then, and now I've rebuilt my life. My parents and I never speak of my sister, nor does anyone else in the family. I'm sure they still keep in touch with her, but they're smart enough not to mention her in my presence. When my fiancé asked about her, I said that we wouldn't be inviting her, and I thought that would end the conversation. I never told her exactly what happened, though honestly, I don't think I was obligated to. The fact that we haven't communicated for over 10 years should have been enough for her to understand that I absolutely do not want to see my sister now, or ever. She should have respected that, but instead, she kept bringing it up. Day after day, she kept harassing me about it until I finally snapped and told her that if she talked about my sister again, I'd cancel the wedding. That seemed to make her quiet for a while, but then, 2 days before the wedding, I learned what she had done behind my back. On the day of the wedding, I was standing before the priest waiting for my fiancée to come down the aisle. The music started, and the bridesmaids began entering the hall. Then I noticed my sister among them, walking arm in arm with one of my friends, who looked just as baffled as I was. Even my sister looked very stunned. I stood there in shock for several seconds, completely unable to understand what was happening. My fiancée finally came down the aisle, but she looked nothing but anger and betrayal. I realized that it was her doing, and I couldn't believe that she had arranged something like this, especially on our wedding day. I felt utterly stunned. Of course, most of my guests could understand why I had such a terrible expression on my face. While my fiancée walked toward me down the aisle, she eventually stood opposite me. Still with a broad smile on her face, I didn't waste a single second and asked her, "Why is my sister here?" I categorically told her that under no circumstances did I want to see her. She replied that she didn't want to discuss it now, and that she wanted to get married first, but clearly that was not going to happen. I said we needed to talk immediately, and she admitted that she had told my parents that I was going to reconcile with my sister before the wedding. That's how she convinced them to give her my sister's address and contacts. She said that she had gone to great lengths to persuade them, all just to surprise me by bringing her to the wedding, and she even had the nerve to claim that, in her opinion, it was long overdue for us to put our past behind us. Even though she had no idea what really happened 10 years ago, we stood by the altar arguing for about 5 minutes while our guests waited. I finally realized that there was no point in fighting for these relationships anymore. I was ready to end it all and wanted nothing to do with that woman. So I simply left the ceremony. I heard her calling me to come back, but I ignored it and kept walking until I got into my car. Then I started it and drove off until it got dark. I couldn't find a decent hotel nearby, so I decided to spend the night in the car. In the evening, I canceled everything over the phone and deliberately ignored all calls and messages from my fiancée and her family. Fortunately, I had enough gas to return home the next day, but as soon as I saw my fiancée's car in the driveway, I decided to stop at a hotel. 2 days passed, and I didn't answer a single call or message from my fiancée. My parents also tried to reach me, but I couldn't bring myself to talk to them. Honestly, I can't believe they were naive enough to think that I could suggest making up with my sister and believe the lies of my fiancé. The least they could have done was to call me to confirm whether I really wanted that, but they chose to believe that this was the surprise I wanted at my wedding. What infuriates me the most is that my fiancé had no right to act behind my back, to manipulate my parents, and then invite my sister, whom I hadn't spoken to in 10 years, to our wedding. She created complete chaos that could have been avoided if she had simply respected my word. A few hours ago, she sent me a very long message in which she explained that only yesterday, after I left the wedding, she learned from my parents what had really happened years ago. She apologized for shocking me and agreed that she should have listened when I said I didn't want to see my sister. She also mentioned that my parents and friends were furious with her for her actions and had given her a dressing down for it. It was a terrible time for me, and maybe someday in the future I would tell her everything. But until then, she could just take my word for it. I have no intention of marrying her anymore, but I'm not sure. Should I apologize to her? I don't feel guilty, and if I were to apologize, she should do so without trying to shift the blame onto me. So what do you think? Am I at fault for not telling my fiancé why I cut off contact with my sister so many years ago? Update 1. I've been living in a hotel for 3 days now. Yesterday I posted my question, and I think I was right not to apologize because I'm still ignoring her. This morning, I finally spoke with my mom. It was a strange and tense conversation, but she said she was terribly sorry for how everything turned out, and that she should have known that I would never want to see my sister. She explained that my fiancé had contacted them several weeks ago and practically persuaded them before they agreed to give her my sister's contacts. My fiancé also made them promise not to tell me because she wanted it to be a surprise. Now they understand that it was a stupid decision on their part, and I'm glad they apologized. I'm not sure if I can forgive them right now, as my feelings are too mixed, but I think with time I will be able to forgive them, just not now. I plan to return home in a few days, but first I need to make sure that my fiancée is not there. Obviously, if she's going to leave, the house belongs to me. I'll give her enough time to pack her things and move, more than she deserves. These relationships are definitely over, and honestly, I feel relieved. Update 2. A few days ago, I told my fiancée that she must vacate the house as soon as possible, and I gave her 5 days to do so. Today is the 6th day, and I returned home expecting that she had already moved, as she had texted that she would move out today. However, to my surprise, I found her in the living room. She had apparently parked her car somewhere far enough away so that I would think she wasn't home, and I fell for it. I was very irritated upon seeing her and said that I absolutely did not want to discuss anything with her right now. But as usual, my fiancée ignored my words and started talking about how much she had suffered over the past few days, and that I could at least tell her where I was. For some reason, she decided that despite everything that had happened, we could just continue our relationship as if it were on pause. When I didn't answer, she continued, accusing me of not telling her the whole truth about the situation with my sister. She even claimed that I hid information from her that could have saved her from trouble when she went to see my sister. Then I snapped. I couldn't believe she had the nerve to try to shift the blame onto me. I told her outright to get the hell out of my house, and that it was over between us. She looked a bit stunned. I think she didn't take what I said seriously, and didn't expect such an outcome. She tried to argue and seemed ready to cry, but her tears no longer affected me. I said she had to leave immediately because I could no longer see her, and her voice drove me crazy. I couldn't listen to her nonsense anymore and wanted her gone forever. I suppose I hit a nerve because she broke down in tears right there, but I was so emotionally drained that I left her crying in my bedroom, closed the door, and went to sleep. I seemed to have slept for a long time because when I woke up outside, it was already dark and my fiancée was not at home. I know she will return to pick up her things, but now I'm finally alone and can think and process everything that happened this week. Update 3. It's been 3 days since my fiancée left, yet she still cannot accept that it's over and calls me every day. I don't answer her calls, but honestly, I feel a little sorry for her. Regarding my parents, they came to me yesterday and sincerely apologized for everything that happened, fully taking the blame on themselves. I finally asked them what my sister had been doing all these years. They told me that after that incident, they sent her to an anger management rehabilitation center, where she underwent several months of treatment and intensive therapy because her mental issues turned out to be much more serious. After she finished treatment, she finally got into college, but had to rent an apartment to live in. My parents visited her on weekends. They said she became much calmer and more balanced, and even started working around the same time as I did. For the past 7 years, she has lived not far from the city and runs her own business, which is probably not bad. My parents also told me that after I left the wedding, my sister seemed to understand that it was all because of her, and she immediately left, apologizing to my parents for her presence. Apparently, my fiancé told them that it was just a rehearsal and not a real wedding, but everything looked too real for her, so she was utterly confused. My parents also sent me a letter from my sister after they left, and once I opened and read it, an hour later, I was still shaken. She apologized for everything I had to go through because of her during our childhood and teenage years, and promised that she had changed. Her words were filled with regret that we could have been best friends instead of bitter rivals. She said she hoped that someday I could forgive her, and that we might have a chance to become the brother and sister we wished we could be. I teared up reading the letter and realized that I, too, want that. I'll give myself time to think everything over, and perhaps when I'm ready, I can forgive her. After all, I was quite harsh with her as a child. Now I just want to rebuild my life and focus on improving my mental state because the past few months have affected me greatly. Honestly, I feel that I've had enough drama in my life, and I'm just tired. Well, now please, tell me what you think of this whole story in the comments. In my opinion, the author is completely right, because if she had indeed gone through with it without discussing it with me first, well, that would have been one thing. But since she already said she wanted to invite her sister, and I said, in no case, then everything is clear. The fiancé is very controlling and utterly unhinged. It's no wonder the author broke up with her. In general, write your opinion about this story. You can also share yours in the comments. It will be interesting to read. Don't forget to subscribe and like. Your support is very important to me. Take care of yourself.